Hi, friend. Logan Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, you're going to be hearing just from me, Logan, all about some of my best production tips and some production decisions that I think you, as a planner or a producer or an event director, need to keep in your back pocket because some of them are such a big impact on your event. They might even matter more than your big event theme. So let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Alrighty, friend. Again, it's just me, Logan Clements, talking to you this week. Mary and I sometimes do these solo episodes. You're going to be hearing from her next week more about some great things in the nonprofit space, but you probably could have guessed I'm going to talk about event production. And I'm actually really excited about this topic because I was trying to think of something that I hadn't covered yet in production that could apply not just to those that do event production, but anybody, honestly, in the event space. And when I do events, I often get brought in when it's a little too late to make some of these decisions. I love coming in from the start and being a really involved part of the pre-planning process, but that's just not all the events that I can do. More often than not, some key decisions have already been made and I'm coming in to show call or stage direct or deck manage. And so these are just some tidbits that I wish planners and event hosts, event organizers, event directors, event managers, whatever you call yourself in those early stages of planning an event, that are some key decisions that can help set yourself up for success and have a smoother production along the way. So starting broad, what event production means and these production decisions that I'm talking about. Event production is usually anything with a microphone and a stage. Your stage doesn't actually have to be a physical stage. It's just where your programming is. It often does involve some kind of staging, some kind of microphone, some kind of, screens. Again, it can be really small scale for 20 people. It can be up to 1,000, 3,000 plus. It can be huge. It can be giant LED boards. It's really honestly so up for interpretation. And one of the things that I think is so important is that some folks in the event space, I think, really think that certain elements make your event memorable. And whether that's maybe your flashy speakers that you get, that, amazing celebrity that's going to come and talk on your panel, or maybe they think you're going to get blown away by the destination because there's so much effort put into picking the venue. Or maybe they think you're going to be raving about the entertainment that you saw at the after party or during the cocktail reception. And what I feel like, honestly, is impactful for events. Yes, it's buzzy to say, oh, I saw this celebrity at the event or this famous person spoke. But honestly, the way you make your event memorable and one that people want to come back to again is really focused on getting some of the key logistical details right, meaning you're not overstimulating your attendees all day long. You're not running them into the ground with sessions back to back to back from 9 to 5 and then asking them to go out and be social and do social activities at night. There's just certain things that I think can feel so simple when I say them, and when I list them later in this episode, you're going to be like, duh, Logan, I'm already doing those. But I want to encourage you to actually audit your event, and especially events that you have the power to kind of make some of these changes. Like I said, I often am handed schedules where some of these concepts are not already baked in and we try to make last minute adjustments. But I can tell you some of these tips I'm going to give you. I have come on site to an event and been like, okay, they didn't plan enough time between sessions. So I just know things are going to be late. Which, while that's not the end of the world, that is something that can be frustrating both to crew, but also to attendees. So just things to keep in mind. And then I also think a lot of times with events, people get really into the idea of the theme of the event, the overall vision and design. And that is the really, I guess, kind of fun and sexy side of an event compared to production decisions. I feel like sometimes those can feel a little mundane, or even a place just where if you're a planner that sees an AV order and your head starts spinning, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to think through why I have to know some of these. So my goal here talking about it is not that your theme doesn't matter. I think a theme can be helpful when curating agendas and speakers and direction. But I do think, I've worked a lot of national sales kickoffs for companies, and it is one of those where I laugh that the theme changes every year, but I say it in air quotes because it's usually some empowering word that's supposed to inspire your attendees. And it really does more come down to who is trying to do different programming ideas? Who is realizing that the reason folks want to come to these kickoffs is because they want time together, and they're shifting their agenda away from these monotonous keynotes and more into interactive, hands-on breakout sessions, not just talking at you in keynotes and then talking at you in breakouts. Like, there's ways where the theme is important, but I would not waste all of your time trying to focus on that, and instead making sure you're dedicating some meetings and check-ins with your production team, with your AV partner, with your production partner, to go through some of these things I'm going to mention. So if you haven't picked up on it, I will say these are some production decisions that are big, might feel small, but they really are big decisions that matter. So I'd say there's two buckets in the production space when it comes to making certain decisions. There are ones that attendees are going to notice. They're going to impact the experience that me as a regular person walking off the street is going to notice. And then there's going to be the things that your production team notices or your producer would notice. And so those are two kind of buckets that I think are really helpful for you, a planner or an organizer, to think through. And some of the ones that I'm going to focus on are going to be those production choices that most affect your attendee experience, just because I feel like the other bucket gets a little too technical and in the weeds and behind the scenes, that not as crucial if you have these next 25, 30 minutes with me. So number one thing, production choice that I feel like affects your attendee experience is buffer time between sessions and speakers. This is so important. People do not plan enough time between their sessions. And it's not just, again, it's thinking about, what do you want your attendees to do between sessions? Is it just a little break and a breather for them to get up and stretch? Is it that they need to actually move from that room and go to another room? Is it that they are going to have 5 speakers back to back, and you had a really impactful, that celebrity that we talked about earlier? Do you want to give people time to go in the hallway and talk about it, so it really sticks with what they heard, and it just doesn't get snowballed into the next speaker? Another thing at production choice I feel like folks get wrong is not thinking through the energy peaks and dips in their run a show. And this is something that's a little harder to know. And again, you might need to work with a producer, but your attendees cannot be at 100 for 2 straight hours. They will burn out. Their heads will hurt. You'll get complaints. You need to think of those kind of peaks and valleys of where you really want to make it this big impactful moment. And then you got to kind of let people settle in. Then you have another big impactful moment and you let people settle in. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And my third production choice, I think that really affects your attendee experience, is how long you're asking folks to sit without moving. Again, the best test for this is for you to actually go and attend an event. It doesn't have to be your event, but I would say something of a similar duration. Say you're a conference planner, you plan conferences that are 2 days or 3 days long. When was the last time you went to a 2 to 3 day conference? I would make sure you're doing that and going at least once a year to another conference and experiencing that feeling of oh my gosh, 15 minutes is truly not enough time for me to get to where I need to go. Or you're wow, 5 minutes is just, there's no point. I'm just rolling into the next one. And there's just things you'll learn. And I'm a big empathetic person, hence why this tip is for you to kind of tap into your inner empath. But I think there's some power in realizing how long you're having folks sit without moving. And then what you're asking them to do. Because if you had me sitting without moving for hours on end, I'm probably gonna be more focused on how physically uncomfortable and tired I am than actually really digesting what I'm seeing or hearing. So going back to my first one about timing between sessions. So my pro tip for you is, I think you need a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes between sessions. And honestly, you're going to need to increase that timing if you are in a large venue or have a large number of attendees. You also, on the flip side, want to make sure that you're opening doors early enough to allow folks to get in. And this is why they're kind of hand in hand as well. Doors open, let's say your session starts at 2 p.m. Doors should open, I would say standard is usually 20 to 30 minutes before. So doors are opening at 1:30. Now, if you have them in a session until 1:45, you're not going to have anybody coming in when you open doors, in air quotes, at 1:30. So your doors are really at 1:45. So now you've only left 15 minutes for everybody to get from their other room to your room. And that's just saying if everything is running on time. I have seen some people trying to get 1,000 people into their seats in 10 minutes, and it's just not realistic. I think you also have to consider, based on your space you're in, where are the bathrooms and where is the coffee or your drink station located? Because those are things, if they're right outside the room you're asking people to hustle to, all right, that's convenient. Maybe they'll grab it on their way in. But if the bathrooms are kind of down a side hall, or the food and beverage is going to be down a different side hall or outside their breakout room and they're hustling back to the general session, that's going to cause bottlenecks and really slow people down. but just making sure you're thinking not only about how much time your attendees need to physically move from space, like point A to point B, what you want them to do in that break. Again, I think 15, 20 minutes does not leave you a lot of time for your attendees to actually slow down and have those serendipitous water cooler moments. I always say my favorite part is being near the coffee station, and that's how I usually chat somebody up while we're getting coffee, and that's how I make a new connection. But if I'm trying to hustle and figure out what room I'm supposed to go to, I'm probably not really striking up an authentic conversation in that amount of time versus if you'd given me 30 minutes or 40 minutes. So that's talking about buffer time between sessions and speakers. I do challenge you right now to go back and look at your last event agenda and make sure you've given yourself enough time between things, thinking about breaks, even if you're doing dinner breaks. Sometimes during like award shows, they don't want dinners clattering around, dinner plates clattering around during that. So making sure you're putting an adequate time for food and beverage. And that's a question your food and beverage people can help you answer if you've never done that before, of like, hey, how much of a break in my programming do I need for you to serve the main course and clear the main course? And they'll tell you based on your room size, their experience, their staff. That's usually between like 30 and 45 minutes. And then really think about your doors open time, because that's another one that I will say I've had some organizers who clearly haven't thought about the door opening time, and they've scheduled rehearsals with speakers almost all the way up until doors should have been opened. And that's something that you just want to make sure you have, again, giving yourself the gift of a couple minutes buffer versus saying, I'm having rehearsals going up until 10 minutes before the session starts. So now you only have 10 minutes for doors, and you're really asking your attendees to kind of hustle into their seats. And I can tell you, whenever I see that, I know we're going to be starting late. So that's a tough one. My second point, talking about managing energy. This is something that not only helps your attendees, but it can help your crew. You really just don't want to be all like flashy lights and content 1,000%, the audio all the way up all of the time. I think you want to make sure and go through your content and see where are those big impactful moments. Like I'm seeing a lot of companies at corporate events, they love their big opening video, dramatic countdown into an opening video, and we're bumping that audio, we're doing fun lights, and then we settle into that keynote. And then you can do something at the end to kind of send them off on an energizing tune. But doing kind of at that 1,000% all the time, it's just your attendees are going to start to shut down. And that is both a content choice, but also a production choice. And then my last one about talking about people who are sitting without moving, I will say post-lunch doldrums are real. Again, not just for your attendees, but for your crew as well on the production side. So try thinking about doing a breakout or some kind of interactive piece after your lunch break to help combat that, because I think our bodies just want to like kind of have a siesta after we eat. One way we've done this with like the Better Events Conference is we do walk and talks, which we've done in different methods where we've had 8 like speakers that talked earlier in the day, then like kind of lead in air quotes, walk around the neighborhood, getting you out of the venue. If it's cold, we've said you could stay in venue, but like get out of the ballroom. We've also done versions where it's more, we have like a topic that sparks conversation and you just split off into small groups and walk and talk. And that's something that our attendees have really, really raved about. Now, I do want to talk about staffing when it comes to production decisions. This is one of the places that I think I see folks either mainly severely underestimate the number of staff they need on their production team. And this isn't all on you as the event organizer or the planner. Again, I just empower you to ask questions with what I'm saying, even if you don't feel like you have all the answers. Like, think about at your event, how many things are happening at the same time? And I will say from my experience, I rarely do an event where there's only one single person sitting at the tech table. I think my most simple shows that I do, there's 2 of us sitting at the tech table. It's usually myself and a tech operator from the AV company. I'm usually then helping with graphics, meaning your PowerPoint, your slides, and they're more focused on running the audio, and maybe they help, or both of us are working to switch what you see on screen. The more complex the show, the more staff you need. If you have lots of videos, you definitely need a separate video operator from your graphics operator. Audio, if you have a ton of mic handoffs, meaning you have different speakers coming up this way, that way, this, doing all kinds of things, you really need to make sure that you have an A2. So usually your main audio operator is called an A1, and where they stay is next to your soundboard, which is usually at your tech table, sometimes in the back of the room, sometimes back behind the stage, but they are really, anytime your speakers are talking, you want that A1 at their station. And so if there's a lot of mic movements and a lot of mic changes happening during your event, you don't want your A1 walking away to help the next speaker, and all of a sudden you have an audio challenge with the speaker that's currently on stage. So that's why you have an A2, essentially a second audio person who is not tethered to an audio board. They work very closely with your A1, but they are able to set up a separate station of just helping mic people. And they're trained in audio, so they know where to put the mics. They know what to test. And that's something that, again, seems simple, but I'm just seeing some shows where they don't ask for it, especially if you have live music. Oh my gosh, I worked an event last year where we got severely delayed in our rehearsal schedule because we only had an A1 and they had a live guitarist and singer. And then they had a surprise second guitarist that showed up that we found out about last minute. And we were just stuck because we were waiting for the audio person to walk from the back of the room to his audio board, back to the front of the room to help the musician like adjust, then back to the back of the room. And he still had one of those like fancy iPads that could help make some adjustments. But it was one that afterward, I literally made a note. I was like, why did this show not have an A2 that would have just like vastly sped up our whole process? So again, if you have lots of mics, live music, anything like that, you're going to need 2 people doing your audio. And then my last one for crewing is usually having a stage manager or a deck manager. Usually you can get away with just one, but there's been some shows I've been on where if you have speakers coming up and down from stage left and stage right and kind of doing all kinds of different things, you probably need 2 people because it's really hard as one singular person to kind of run back and forth between both sides of the stage, especially if you're not doing anything like behind your screens, behind your stage. So just making sure that you're thinking about, again, how many things are happening at once and just asking those questions to your production partner, your AV partner. They can easily answer this. I would always question what staff they have. I do find sometimes in-house AV will overstaff something or sorry, they will overstaff and then understaff at the same time, if that makes sense. I was on a couple of shows this past year where I joked that there was one person on the in-house crew who was wearing like 5 hats. They were doing the graphics. They were doing the videos. They were doing my audio stingers, like the walk-on songs that the speakers heard. They were doing the lower thirds for the stream. And I would joke in my head, I'm like, does this person an octopus? Like they have like 4 computers that they're controlling. Meanwhile, there's another person who I thought was supposed to be one of those jobs, and they're just kind of sitting around. So making sure, again, whatever the focus of your event is, like understanding the key roles and responsibilities of everybody on site. If your head is spinning, again, this is something I'm able to help with, not just I love being on site, but I'm also opening up my schedule to do some consulting, and I help people demystify and interpret their AV orders and hopefully make sure they get everything they need and nothing extra that they don't. So kind of thinking through this question, though, I started at the top of talking about production decisions that are mattering more than your theme. I had this question come up of like, where have I seen budget spent on nice to have items that ended up creating stress elsewhere? Which I think is actually a very smart question. When it comes to production, I'd say microphones and screens are essential. You need to be able to hear your speakers and you often need to be able to see your content. But you could adjust the size and quantity of those items depending on your budget. Most mics come in a 4-pack and screens, it's like we're talking projectors are probably going to be your cheapest, but you can also do monitors just because that's, you're saving on not having 2 pieces of equipment of projector and projection screen. It's just all together. Again, especially for smaller events, that's a way that you can kind of build some impact. It's also been a way that I've been leveling up some of my smaller events that started with 1 projection screen. Then we moved to 2. Then this previous year, we had 2 projection screens and 2 monitors in the back of the room to help our attendees see because our slides were so dense with content. Another way that I would say is like a nice to have that can all of a sudden create stress in your production is adding in like a musical act. This seems like it would be a piece of cake, but their equipment needs, or what bands sometimes call their tech rider, which just means usually their list of tech requirements that they expect of you as the event host or venue to source for them. And this can really cause your equipment rental budget to like go way up. They also might want food and beverage and just some other stuff where it's like, oh, getting this act seemed cool, but wow, they came with all these bells and whistles and now it's actually pretty expensive and time consuming to have them come and perform at our event. And lastly, I think lighting is a great place where if you have budget, it's an amazing way to create ambiance with just some little equipment. I mean, you can do basic uplighting. You can do some movers. Everyone knows of like a gobo, which is the lovely like projecting of your logo onto the wall or different shapes. That's super cool. But if you're someone who's like, Logan, I'm really seeing AV go up and I want to save some money, I'd say it could turn into a nice to have, especially if you're not streaming or recording your event anywhere. That I think you could reduce your level of stress. That's one less thing to set up. Also, you often will get lights that go on rigging, meaning they're suspended from the ceiling of the room you're in. And rigging costs have just gone up and up and up and up the last couple of years. So that is an easy way that you're like, oh, night lights were nice to have. And I will tell you, in-house companies and most AV companies will just like put some lights on the order. I see it more in-house than external because they seem to be better at listening to what you need. But the in-house folks, they'll just put it on there and you're like, whoa, why does that cost $15,000? That's an easy savings, is to reduce or cut down on your lighting. I also think another way that you could, get rid of a nice to have and save you some of that stress is kind of production adjacent. Is thinking about signage. In some of these venues, they're going to have like an upcharge for you to utilize some of their digital signage, or maybe do wrapping decals in certain areas. And I think it can be impactful and cool. Like if it's a photo moment, I do think for wayfinding, you could cut down on the actual signage and that whole process of the creative and approving and getting it printed and all of that stress, and instead kind of invest more in staff and floaters who can be in hallways kind of directing attendees, especially if you're doing things that have a lot of breakouts, especially a public facing event. I've just found wayfinding people can be a great way to reduce stress versus splurging on all this fancy signage that folks end up missing, or it's not as clear as you thought it was until you were there on site. And another challenge I think I get as a producer when it comes to production decisions is how I prioritize things, when sometimes everything in your production can feel so important. And my main tactic here is usually thinking about it like if we were in show, when things happen, when things go wrong, when challenges come up. I think that the show progressing forward is the most important. So if it's something that someone flags to me as like, hey, this isn't working, but I realize it's not going to immediately impact what's happening on stage right now, I will often say, it can wait until we're done with this session. It can't wait until tomorrow, but usually it can wait until we're done with the session, and then we can kind of figure out the cause. But if there's something that impacts the session that is live on stage, like a mic goes down or a graphics laptop freezes, that is top priority. That is the focus. That's the most important thing we need to troubleshoot. And all I need is someone to jot down, once we've solved it, exactly like shorthand, super quick. What do we think happened? Knowing later that day, we're probably going to revisit and be like, hey, so what happened there? Like, we don't have time for all the excuses or the finger pointing or anything like that. It's more solutions driven. How do I solve it? How do I fix it? And then the later it's like, yeah, what happened and how can I avoid that in the future? But really just thinking about like what impacts the show moving forward. About production decisions, I think something that I was thinking about is I'm celebrating 10 years in business this year as LSG, working for myself. And one of the things I was thinking about is just how my like thinking has evolved as a producer, and the not necessarily boundaries, but the things I will like advocate for and fight harder for with my clients. Like I said, I don't always come in when there's a time to make a change, but usually things I'll flag even the week before the event. And the main one is ample rehearsal time with your speakers, and then making sure you have internal rehearsal time, which means no client, no speakers, with like just your AV team before that time. Mainly because you don't want to waste your speakers' time. You want the mics to have been tested and teched and troubleshot and working. You don't want your speaker on stage when you're hearing that feedback or even the purposeful ringing out of a room that like audio will push a mic until it gives feedback. And that's how they kind of ring out the room and make sure the mic is actually balanced. But to a speaker, it can sound like they're having a technical difficulty. And now I'm stressed thinking I'm going to have tech issues during my session. And the way I do this and what I really advocate for is you have to really reverse engineer your rehearsal schedule from like show time backwards to your load in time. And you also need to make sure that you get a technical perspective, especially if you're doing this and you are not a production person, you're kind of just using your other logistical expertise. I would just make sure that you are putting together a production schedule and then a rehearsal schedule, and then like submitting it to the technical director or your AV partner of like, hey, I just did this on a show that I actually had last month, being like, hi, I want to do rehearsals with speakers for 2 hours in the evening. I had it starting at 4 and I thought we could do teching at 3. And they go, oh, they made a face. And I was like, do you need a little more time than that? And they're like, yeah, could we do 4? And I said, great. Okay. I would rather have my production schedule and rehearsal schedule be truer to what we're actually going to hit than have be aspirational. And now I'm stressed that we're running behind, while the technical team would say, well, we were never running behind. You just had unrealistic expectations. And then your speakers are running behind. So that's something that in the weeks leading up, that's such an easy fix to do, is just shift things by an hour. We hadn't even confirmed yet with speakers what time they needed to come. So that was something easy. And I wouldn't have caught that unless I'd asked. Because it's also doesn't matter if last year you guys got load-in done by 2 p.m. This year, it might be a different space, a different vendor, a different number of hands that they're bringing to help them with setup. And that technical person can answer that question. You also want to make sure you run your rehearsal schedule by your client. Feels obvious, but like before you even lock it in, just knowing, like, they will know some of the constraints that maybe their leadership team has, like maybe speakers aren't going to fly in until a certain time. And that'll kind of save you on one end while also talking to your technical person to make sure that your big screens, your LED screens, your mics, everything will be ready by speaker time. You're all on the same page. I also have been really advocating in that rehearsal schedule topic is how much time you give per speaker. Because again, I think some of these folks who make these schedules just kind of arbitrarily pick times, or maybe the client's picking them and they don't know any better. So they just accept, yeah, that's, 20 minutes sounds great, or 30 minutes for 5 speakers sounds great. And what I'm really finding is you need minimum 15 minutes for a solo speaker slot. If you have more than one speaker doing like a panel together, or they're handing off, that's where you're getting into, like, you probably need 30 minutes, if not more. When I say 15 minutes, all that's in that block is really only time for what we would call like a stage tour, which is like talking through how your speakers are going to enter, how they exit, maybe put a quick mic on them, let them say a few words. And then maybe if they're on time and they're moving through stuff quickly, you have time for a quick click through of their slides. That does not give them time to actually rehearse their content. Again, I came across this multiple times last year where I was having clients schedule 20-minute rehearsal slots, and then the speaker all of a sudden starts actually giving their talk. And their talk is a 30-minute talk, but because we've given them the stage tour, gotten them settled, it's, worked on their walk in and walk out, they really only have 10 minutes and they're trying to talk through 30 minutes of content. And now you're doing the dance of, okay, when do you kick them off your stage or politely ask them to wrap up so you can get to your next speaker, speaker timer session, your speaker rehearsal session. So I think that is something that is so easy to know and get ahead of, because I feel like if you start rushing speakers in rehearsals, this can lead to speakers like feeling that rushed feeling and not feeling supported. You want to control what you can control and block in enough time for those speaker rehearsals. And I feel like it's a good place to end here would be talking about, like, what do I worry less about now with time and experience in the event world? And I would say my big thing for production decisions is always remind yourself, like, we're not saving lives here. Yes, there's certain aspects of what we do with rigging and installations that could sometimes put people at risk. And so you want to make sure you're not skimping there and you're doing those things right. But I do think there are basic things that you can do that set your production up for success. In event production, double checking things goes a long way. Talking through backup plans, especially like backup mics, backup clickers, backup graphics machines, literally having like a second laptop with all the PowerPoints loaded. Should your first one freeze, you can just switch over to the second one. Also having backup power plans. I recently, in the last couple of weeks, had a camera go down from a power surge from the front of the room. And they quickly were able to switch to battery, but it didn't have enough power in it to charge in it to last the whole session if it had it to. So moving forward, we always made sure batteries were fully charged. So I think, again, worrying less of we can't control exactly what's going to happen, but you can make sure that you've talked through kind of backup scenarios for when those weird production gremlins, as I like to call them, pop up, so that you're not all, oh my gosh, what did we say we wanted to do with mics? It's like, nope, speaker knows, hey, if it blipped for a second, they should have kept talking. If it blipped for 10 seconds, my colleague from backstage is running you out a handheld mic. You've talked about this. They know what's happening. They might panic still a little bit, but at least you've already expressed what's happening versus them panicking and feeling all alone on stage up there with a mic that doesn't work. So hopefully you've learned something new about different production decisions that can be more important than your event theme. Again, I think it's fun to be in the theme and design side of things, but some of these production decisions, like scheduling, both for a speaker the speaker process, but also looking at your agenda and looking at your content and making sure you have those peaks and valleys and giving your attendees time to recharge. I said fans there because when I work sports, it is something that like sports are really high energy. But if you made their fans like do the wave every single break, they're gonna revolt. They're gonna hate it. You can't do it. You just can't. But you can mix in, you could do the wave now, and then, okay, this one you're going to do a slower, but a sing along, maybe some Sweet Caroline. Okay, this next one we're going to do a fan cam that'll get the really energetic people up, but those that aren't as energetic can sit and just kind of enjoy. You got to think about those different beats in your programming and make sure that you're not just kind of going 1,000% at your attendees. So I would really just think about timing, I guess. If I had to pick one thing you take away from this episode, is thinking about timing and how it impacts not just your production schedule, but the attendee experience. And now that brings us to the end of the episode, and I have the bonus tip. And mine is, don't have time in your event space for full speaker rehearsals? Then designate a speaker rehearsal room with a screen and a hookup for your slides at your venue. Speakers can run through their slides and practice together, and that solves that problem I mentioned earlier where you didn't have enough time on stage for them to go through a full content rehearsal, but giving them an alternative space where they can go, especially if they're having to co-present with someone who maybe they've never presented with before. Having a designated space is just so key. I've seen this on my larger shows, have really utilized the number of rooms they get at different buildings and having one space that's just for speaker rehearsal room. I've also seen like a speaker ready room is just like a green room, but you could kind of either combine the two or you can really build this out. Like it could be more than just a monitor and a hookup. It could be like with an in-room technician and speaker notes. They get mic'd up and they're really doing it like a true dry run. Or you can make it be an HDMI hookup and a monitor with like a Logitech clicker, the ones you can buy online, and just like an info sheet of like, oh, here's who you call if you have any tech issues. So both of those are good solutions. And it's just something to think about if you're coming up on being like, I can physically not get all my speakers on stage with the amount of rehearsal time we have available when you've done that reverse engineering. And a rehearsal room can kind of help you with that. So that brings us to the end of the episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email directly at bettereventspod@gmail.com. And you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Mary and I love hearing from you. Just let us know in the note before you hit connect that you heard about us through the podcast. And if you want even more Better Events content, you can join our private community on Substack. We will thank you for listening. And as always, we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.